Arba avos nezikin. That's how the Gemara in Masechet Bava Kama begins. There are 4 different categories of damages for which a person is responsible. And they're all found in this week's Parsha. They're all found in Parsha Mishpatim. Now, the Gemara in Bava Kama spends many pages trying to figure out exactly how we see each of these specific categories in the Psukim, but essentially they're all there. We hear damages that you're sure your ox could do if it gores someone, or if it eats their produce, or it tramples their fields. We hear about the damages your pit can do if you dig a pit in a public property and someone falls into that pit. We hear about damages an ish can do, a fire, if you light a fire and it goes out and it burns people's property. All the different damages are found in this week's Parsha. But a person may be tempted to stop and ask, why is it that the Torah needs to delineate each of these specific kinds of damage? Can't the Torah just tell me it's not good to don't damage other people's property? And then we could intuit that it applies to all different categories of damage? But the Mishnah, this opening Mishnah that I referenced in Bava Kama, it addresses that question. And it says no, because each of these categories are different. And just because the Torah would have told me, let's say that I'm responsible for damages that involve me being malicious, being sadistic, and I just want to damage for the sake of damaging and I'm not benefiting from it, just because I know I'm responsible in that scenario, doesn't mean I'm necessarily responsible in the scenario where I am benefiting from it. Or maybe just because I know I'm responsible for damage that happens with my shore, with my ox, because my ox is passive and it goes out and is active, and it actively causes damage, doesn't mean I necessarily know that I'm obligated for damage that happens with my pit. Because my pit is passive, it's not like actively doing anything, and maybe I'm less responsible in that scenario, and the Torah has to say, no, you're even responsible in that scenario. So that's why the Torah has to specifically delineate all these categories, so that I know I'm not just responsible in one category, I'm also responsible in every category, because it's not something I would have intuited otherwise. Which seems like a nice answer at first, till you take a step back and ask myself, why is it not intuitive? Shouldn't it be obvious that I should be responsible for my actions, and if I do something that hurts other people, I should be obligated to pay for it, I should be responsible? But the answer, obviously, is no. It isn't obvious. It isn't intuitive. This idea that I'm responsible for my actions is not something we've seen in the Torah until this point. In fact, that's the whole point of Parsha Mishpatim. Parsha Mishpatim is this chiddush. It's this new idea that I'm not just responsible for myself and for how my actions affect myself, but I'm also responsible for how my actions affect others. And we're so used to this idea because we grew up that way, but it's not something that's natural to people. It's something that originated in Parsha Mishpatim and has permeated every single aspect of society, both Jewish and secular. But the chiddush starts here, that I'm not just responsible for my actions, the way they affect me, but I'm also responsible for how my actions affect other people. And we see this manifested beautifully, not just in the Psukim of Parsha Mishpatim themselves, but in the Psukim that appear both before and after the story, or the laws that are written down in this week's Parsha. We jump to the end of last week's Parsha, the end of Parsha Yitro, or more like the middle. Jump to Perek Yud Tet, right before the Jews received the Aseret HaDebrot, and Moshe is going down and telling the people all the instructions that God has given them for how to prepare for Har Sinai. The pasuk says as follows: Then Moshe came down, and he gave the people at kol hadvarim ha'ila asher tivau Hashem, all these things, all these commandments that God has commanded them for how to prepare for Har Sinai. And how did the people respond? Vayanu chol ha'am yachdav, and all the people answered together. Vayomaru, and they say, kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh. Everything Hashem does, we will. Everything Hashem says, we will do. That was before Parsha Mishpatim. Jump to after Parsha Mishpatim, the end of this week's Parsha, Pasuk Kaf Daled. There's a similar account of Moshe coming down and speaking to the people. There are the opinions, Rashi brings down this opinion, that this account that happens after all the laws written in Parsha Mishpatim actually occurred before Parsha Mishpatim, actually occurred before Har Sinai. But that's not the simple reading of the Psukim. And I'll explain to you why in a moment. Because there are a couple of key differences between the narrative at the end of Parsha Mishpatim that are different than the narrative at the end of Parsha Yitro. We read the narrative at the end of Parsha Yitro. Now let's see what it says at the end of Parsha Mishpatim. Moshe similarly goes down to the people. Vayavo Moshe, Vayisaper la'am et kol divrei Hashem. Moshe comes down to the people and tells them all the dvarim, all the words of Hashem. V'et kol hamishpatim, and also all the laws, the mishpatim. And therefore, what's the people's reaction? Vayan kol ha'am, and all the people answer, kol echad, with one voice. Vayomaru, and they say, kol dvarim asher diber Hashem na'aseh. All the things that God said, we will do. Almost identical word for word, besides for 3 key differences. Number 1, the first time Moshe was only telling the people dvarim, the commandments of God, the instructions of how they should conduct themselves. But the second time, it's dvarim plus mishpatim, plus the laws. Where have we heard this word mishpatim before? Maybe it's the name of a parsha. Just throwing that out there. The second difference between the two accounts is the first time the people answered Moshe in the plural, vaya'anu, that they answered in the plural word, as opposed to the second time it's vaya'an in the singular. And the first time where they just answered Moshe, the second time they answered kol echad, with one voice. For some reason, the moment Moshe introduces Mishpatim, gives the people these laws, these rules that are delineated in this week's parsha, everything changes and the people stop becoming a bunch of individuals, but they become one unit. They become kol echad, or to use the wording of Rashi, which he doesn't use here, but he uses in many other places, ki ish echad v'lev echad. They became like one body, one heart. And that's essentially what's going on over here. That the moment that people receive Mishpatim and they learn that they're not just responsible for how their actions affect themselves, but also for how their actions affect other people, they suddenly change and they don't become individuals, but they become like one body. Because the same way, it doesn't help me to protect my right arm at the expense of my left arm, and my left leg, and my right leg, and my heart, and my lungs. My right arm on its own is ineffective. It can't accomplish anything. It needs to make sure that it's taking into account my entire body, and its actions affect the rest of my body. So the same thing is true with Am Yisrael. It doesn't help for one member of Am Yisrael to help himself if it's going to hurt everyone else in the process. Because what's one member of Am Yisrael going to do? Our strength doesn't come from us as an individual, but it comes from us as a people, as one collective unit, as a kol echad, as isha echad, as lev echad. And therefore, we have to make sure that our actions don't just positively help and benefit ourselves, but also positively benefit those around us. The same way our arms need to look out for our legs, I have to look out for my brothers and sisters in Am Yisrael. Keep this in mind, not just when we read the specifics of Parsha Mishpatim, but the general idea of the laws in Parsha Mishpatim. It's something so important we need to remember. Have a great Shabbos. Bye-bye.